Well, good Sunday morning. We are here once again to talk about the tropical storm Isaias. Kyle Dennis is with me. I'm Alyssa Carsley. I have my phone to check all of Facebook messages.
Yeah, we got a question about that yesterday.
Yeah,
So why are you on your phone in the middle of this? This is how we see your questions.
Exactly. I also got the casual message. So we are casual today once again. It got changed real quickly.
Yeah, I looked a little underdressed for this yesterday.
Yeah.
So, kind of just rolled on in.
Exactly.
First cup of
making this very conversational.
That's right.
So the latest update came out at 8 a.m. Still a tropical storm. It's weakened a little bit from last night. It's now winds are 65 miles per hour. It's moving to the northwest a little bit slower, also at 8 miles per hour, and then it's expected to continue to slow down just a little bit more as it makes its way closer to the Florida coastline.
Right, and then eventually it'll start to accelerate.
Right.
But at this point, we're not expecting this to become a hurricane again.
No.
And as you look at it here, we've been saying for days now how this would be such an east-heavy storm.
Right.
You see all of that rain there. That heaviest rain, all those yellows, oranges, reds, and that big solid shield of the dark greens, that's the heaviest rain. That's all east of the center. Look what's going on west of the center. And there's still no scenario really where we expect that this could pass to our west. We still think this passes to our east.
Right.
And you see how sheared off that western side is. And as it continues to, even if it doesn't make landfall, it's still kind of interacting with the Florida Peninsula there. That's all. It's still going to be entraining some of that drier air, and that is only going to continue to weaken that western side.
Yeah, it's completely lopsided. So because of this, our impacts really have not changed.
Right.
Now, if the center of it does get a little bit closer to the coastline, we could see tropical storm force winds push a little bit farther inland. But right now, it's still looking like everything is the worst part of the storm will be staying to our east.
Exactly.
Yeah, in case you're wondering where the center
was.
I
didn't realize that was going to pop up. There you are. So
Yep.
you see, now you can really clearly see how lopsided this is, where the heaviest rain, the strongest wind is east of the center track. So that's really, we'd be at this point, I think, a lot more concerned if we were expecting that to pass to our west.
Right.
That's where we'd have the severe thunderstorm threat, the tornado threat.
Right.
Whereas you see what's happening in Daytona Beach, Orlando. This is kind of what we expect for our area. Bands of rain, broken bands on that western side. Not an all-day persistent rain maybe, but there could be off and on downpours. It still totals, in the end, several inches, but not, an all-day soaking rain.
Exactly, and that's even before the main center even approaches.
Right.
Because after that, there's really nothing on that western side to move in besides the winds after that point. But look at that dry air. Again, that's where the oranges and reds are at. We talked about this yesterday. That dry air was really trying its best to get into the center of the storm, which it ended up doing because that's why it weakened yesterday evening. And there's still a lot of dry air even north of the system, and that's why it's not really going to strengthen as it makes its way north, plus the interaction with land since it is close to the coast of Florida.
Exactly. You see the deepest convection there, the purples and the turquoise shading kind of expanding a bit. That's kind of classic with a weakening storm.
Right.
Instead of a storm that's kind of tightening up. That's not necessarily a sign of strengthening itself. Sometimes actually when storms get weaker, the maximum wind field can expand in coverage. So that's also something else to consider. So there's the latest with it, 65-mile-per-hour winds. Alyssa just said that before. And
the pressure's been coming up slowly. So as pressure rises, it means the storm is weakening.
24 hours ago, we were at like 987.
Yep.
We're at 996. So yeah, the higher the pressure number, generally the weaker the storm. So yeah, it is slowed down a little bit northwest at 8. The center is 40 miles east-southeast of West Palm Beach. So this is as strong as it's going to be, really, going forward from here. Does it maintain the strength? It looks like, the National Hurricane Center is going with that idea. It's possible it could weaken further. But, it's also a possibility that if a weaker storm gets closer to you, your impact can still be greater than a stronger storm offshore.
Right.
So there's the latest cone.
Yeah, so the cone really hasn't changed that much. We're still expecting the center of the system to pass offshore. However, it's really going to depend on how close that center gets to us, or we could see a little bit more tropical storm force winds push a little bit farther inland. But as of right now, right along our coastline, areas east of I-95 have the greatest chance to see those tropical storm force conditions, especially going towards the Lowcountry through Jasper County into Beaufort County and then up towards Charleston, because all of Beaufort County right now is under the tropical storm force or tropical storm warning.
So there you go. Those are the warnings that we are seeing in our area, and this is kind of summing up the impacts right now that we're expecting. And we may revise this somewhat, but right now, this is our best bet for heavy rainfall, 1 to 4 inches. And as we've been saying, it looks like the low country sees the most because, you know, the coastline starts to bend outward a little bit more, stick out a little more to the east. So you will be a little bit closer to that center. And that's why we expect the greatest rain totals in that area.
Right. And the strongest winds right along the coastline of 39 miles per hour or greater. 39 miles per hour is when we have tropical storm force winds. Anything greater than that could also be possible along the coastline. But I do want to mention the strongest winds could potentially be towards Jasper and Beaufort County, as the center of the system could be closest to them as it makes its way up. It's sort of, again, like a Dorian scenario, because last year with Dorian, the low country area saw the strongest winds, but also saw the heaviest rain. So it could be very close to that once again. But farther inland, areas towards Statesboro, Alma, Vidalia, you probably just might get a light breeze out of this. We're not expecting
breeze,
maybe
a shower.
Exactly. A lot of these conditions are just mainly confined to the coastline. And then also, we could also see coastal issues, coastal flooding possible, especially at times of high tide for the day tomorrow. Rip currents, we're already seeing that, as well as rough surf. Right.
Now, we expect the closest pass of the storm to come late in the day tomorrow. So this is early tomorrow morning around 1 a.m. You can see what happens here by 6:30. We may start to get brushed with a quick shower or downpour out ahead of the storm, moving onshore, those little broken bands. And we may see a period of heavy rain tomorrow. It's actually possible this particular model is even overdone, just given how weak the western side is right now. We're not even seeing rain that widespread where it is now.
Exactly.
So, it's possible that this is just a bit overdone. It's kind of giving you a general scenario of how this plays out. And then high tide comes up tomorrow night around 9 o'clock or so. And our winds by that point are already shifting offshore, which is good, that's the reason why with Dorian we never saw or realized the flooding potential along the coast or the storm surge, because it was coming in during low tide.
Exactly, and that's why I like this model, just really to show the timing of it, because I don't necessarily, like Kyle said, agree with how much rain it's showing we're going to get. Not really now periods of heavy rain, but I think a lot of the rain will be mainly scattered, especially since what we saw on the radar was just essentially nothing on that western side besides those outer rain bands moving in.
Right.
So because of that, here's our rainfall total. So again, for the low country, that's where we're expecting the highest rainfall totals, 2 to 4 inches. Slowly cutting back towards Savannah around the I-95 area, and then parts farther inland, Alma, Baxley, maybe an inch of rain depending on exactly where those outer bands do track.
Right, and this may not necessarily be that these totals are seen and observed uniformly across these areas. What we're really talking about here is because of the fact that these outer rain bands are going to be kind of broken up with the localized heavy downpours, these numbers represent the highest totals that we expect to see reported in these areas, not necessarily every single spot gets within that range.
Right, exactly. And the same thing goes for our wind gusts. So right now, as you can see towards the low country, down towards coastal Chatham County, possibly 40 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts. Now again, those are the wind gusts, not sustained winds. So you won't be seeing 60 mile per hour winds for hours and hours and hours. But this is essentially sort of if the low tracks very, very close to the coast. We actually could see more of those stronger winds moving onshore. Not expecting this right now. I think most of us could see 30 to 40 mile per hour winds, but I did want to highlight the low country because the center could be closest to them when they track it, when it tracks up.
Right, so at this point, really, we're trying to prepare you for what is the worst possible outcome we could see in terms of the wind. This is really what we're thinking it is right now. We don't expect these numbers really to go up. If anything, maybe if it ends up tracking a little bit further offshore, we can take these numbers down a little bit. But in terms of, like what we were saying with the rain, and you were saying this also applies to the wind, we expect that the highest reported gusts within each of these shaded areas will fall within this range, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in those colored areas are going to see those winds.
Exactly, and you won't be seeing them the entire time it moves up our coast. Again, these are just the gusts that we are possibly expecting if the center makes its closest.
It may be we only get 1 or 2 reports of gusts into that range, but that's where you would see it in that area. Do we have anything else? Oh, yes, the tides. There you go.
So we've been talking about tides. I know a lot of people are asking storm surge possibility. So here's the tide for tomorrow night. It's around 9:03 for Fort Pulaski. The forecasted tide gauge right now has, at this time, the high tide at 9.3 feet. The flood stage is at 9.5 feet. If the center is a little bit more north than where it's expected to be at 9 o'clock, that is me pushing the water more offshore It's sort of like a Dorian situation where a lot of it is going to be pushed more offshore. We'll have a lower high tide than expected. So it's something we're going to be closely watching. It's sort of more, for storm surge, it's more of a now casting situation where you have to wait. There are specific things you have to wait for to see if we're going to get the strongest onshore winds at that time. So we really have to wait until tomorrow or even tonight to know more for sure.
Right. You know, with a normal situation with a storm, if it's coming in within a couple of hours of what we were expecting the day before, we consider that a really good forecast.
Right.
But in a situation like this, when you're timing it with the tide, it can actually make a pretty big difference in what you ultimately see. Things really have to line up. What you don't want to see is, as the tide's coming in and approaching high tide, the center of the storm is sitting just to the south of you, because that means you're getting the wind blowing out of the east, pushing the water that's already coming in even more so toward the coast. That's what you don't want to see. But like Alyssa was just saying, with this storm passing us, by the time that tide's coming in, our wind is shifting more out of the northeast, paralleling the coast, and eventually shifting offshore, which helps to drain that water as the tide goes back
out. So it's just something we're going to be closely watching. I think for the most parts, for areas in the low country, you're going to be under the part where we could see the most impacts from this situation. But right now, I mean, looking at it, there's really nothing on that western side to give us a lot of rain, strong tropical storm force winds. It doesn't look like it's obviously the worst case scenario, because it's just a very lopsided storm.
I've never been, you know, so happy to be unimpressed.
I know.
You know?
I mean, this is an ugly storm, and I don't mean ugly like, oh my gosh, it's monstrous. I'm saying ugly because it's so, it's not even pleasant to look at, not textbook at all.
I'm happy that the western side is very sad.
Yes.
There you go.
I think everyone's happy about that for sure.
Do we have any questions, comments, concerns?
So Melody Brooks wants to know, at what speed do you expect it to pass through the low country?
Are we talking winds, or are we talking about the speed of the storm?
I think the speed of the storm.
Okay, go ahead.
So if you go to the track, because I wanted to show that it's still, so as it makes its way up the East Coast, we've been talking about our timeline slowing down and how, you know, Monday morning still to the south, now Monday afternoon still to the south, passing through mainly Monday evening. But look at, it's going to pick up speed a little bit more as it gets closer to South Carolina. So I don't know exactly what the speed would be, but I think it'll be moving faster than what it is now, which is only 8 miles per hour. Right
now we're at 8 miles per hour, and you see how, you know, the forecast interval lines start to spread apart a little bit more. So what's going to happen, really right at our latitude, is where we expect it to start accelerating, which is good for us. It may be moving in slowly initially, but then race away from us, and that really helps us too with the tide coming in at 9 o'clock.
That, and it makes impacts go, you know, go down a lot faster too. So that's good news.
We go back to normal.
Right. Maggie Kelly Boo wants to know, what about additional full moon impacts on tides? So with the full moon, obviously we're going to see more of an elevated tide, and I believe the tide gauge has already put that into effect.
Yes.
So we're still looking at the possibility, maybe some coastal flooding. I think that's what we're really going to be seeing, just because by the time we get to high tide tomorrow evening, we're getting more winds, we'll be paralleling the shore, not pushing the water back onshore. So I think tomorrow it shouldn't be as bad as what it could have been.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. You know, even with the full moon, having the wind blowing parallel to the coast or even offshore as the tide's approaching can actually make the tide lower, even though the moon has an influence too. The wind is a much stronger local influence. So, you know, if let's say the wind is blowing offshore during a cycle where, you know, the lunar cycle is creating a higher than normal tide, if you have a strong offshore wind, that's going to counteract that, or at least offset that somewhat, and I think that's going to help.
Right. So it's, I mean, going back to the radar, the water vapor, it's looking like that western side really has nothing to it. So as long as we stay, which we're expecting to stay on that western side with the center of it offshore, some rain, some wind, but it doesn't look like the worst case scenario.
Right. This is not, I don't think this is going to be a blockbuster, memorable storm here. But, you know, there are impacts to watch out for. We will still have some impact from it, but this is not going to be, you know, this is not going to be a huge storm for us.
So Kim's wondering, what can Jessup expect? So areas farther inland, this is really going to be a breezy day, maybe a few isolated rain showers for you. Closer to the coastline, we're going to be seeing the rain, possible tropical storm force winds. But Jessup, I'm thinking Alma, Baxley, even Vidalia, maybe a breeze, cloudy skies, but it's really confined to the coast. If
you are anywhere inland of I-95, this is really not going to have a whole lot of impact. You'll notice it's not just a normal sunny day.
No. It'd be a bit breezy.
Exactly.
For sure.
And really, if you're west of 17, you know, the winds start to drop off.
Yeah, exactly.
So there you go. Anything else we can help with?
is flooding expected in Savannah? That's really going to depend on exactly where the storm is by the time it gets to us during times of high tide. Now we have a high tide early tomorrow morning, but I still think the system's gonna be too far south for us to get a lot of those stronger onshore winds to potentially give us some storm surge or even flooding.
Right. With these storms too, there's you have to watch for two types of flooding. There's the saltwater flooding and the freshwater flooding from the rain. As far as flooding due to rain with this, it's really going to be very localized. If we, there will be some heavy downpours that are pushing on shore, but we were just showing you those rain bands, that we were looking at like right now in Florida. You see how it's not a big solid area like what's going on east of the center. Now, if we were dealing with that, we'd be talking about street flooding and freshwater flooding a lot more, in addition to the saltwater flooding threat. But with this, the downpours are so small scale, isolated. You may see some areas where some streets go underwater, but I don't think that's going to be a widespread threat.
No, I agree. And then Becky was asking if we think it's going to become a hurricane again. So if you go to the water vapor.
Was that next after
It's
this?
next.
Okay.
Look at all that dry air. So it's the orange and red spots. There is really nothing to help the storm intensify anymore as it makes its way up Florida. Plus, you have the land interaction helping to weaken the storm. So I don't see it intensifying. I think it's actually going to slowly weaken as it moves up Florida and closer to us.
Yeah, the eastern side of the storm remains over the water. Yeah. But as really any storm, in this particular case, you see a lot of dry air. But even without that, when storms get close to the coast, they're pulling air from all sides. And if they're pulling air from the western side that's a lot drier than air on the eastern side, they're not going to be able to maintain their strength symmetrically. And that's why the eastern side is going to remain the stronger side.
Right. And then what are the chances of tornadoes? Well, because we're staying on the western side, our chance for tornadoes is low compared to what it would have been if we were even on the northeast side of this.
Right. Sure. It's not out of the question. There could be an isolated tornado if some outer rain bands start, rotating as they push on shore. So yes, that's always going to be something to watch for. It's not necessarily a huge threat right now.
It's definitely not our highest threat, of course. I think our highest threat is going to be the wind as well as the heavy rain that could move in with those bands.
But at least, and especially if this is something you're concerned about and it's worth, staying on alert for, make sure you have our app, because that will alert you as any time a tornado warning comes out, severe thunderstorm warning, it'll let you know right away. And the good thing about it is you don't have to get all the alerts for all areas. You can specify it just for the area that you're
your location. And also another cool thing about our app is if you aren't able to watch our newscast and get the latest updates, you can actually put the track on top of the radar and see where the cone is, where the actual center of the storm is located compared to you. So it's actually some really cool things you can do on our radar as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Is that it?
That's it.
All right. Well, it is now 10:38. We can still see your comments throughout the day. I went on yesterday and still was continuing to answer to people after we were done being live. So if you're watching this later, don't feel like it's too late to ask a couple of questions. We can still respond.
Yeah, we have a new track and update coming out at 11. So of course we'll let you know what that is. You can check
look for the post.
Yep, post. WSAV.com. Yep. All that fun stuff.
We got you covered.
Exactly.
We'll both be here tomorrow morning.
Yes.
All right. That's right on one over. You are going to be here, right? No?
Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.